or something that you would like for us to know and celebrate, or sorrow with you. We're not passing a microphone, but please stand up, speak loudly. No.
Oh, okay.
Please stand up, speak loudly. If we can't hear you, I will summarize. to be spoken aloud. Thank you. What's next?
Carly Dias. Welcome to Bookmarks, celebrating Black voices. Anti-Racist Baby is a book that provides simple steps we can all use to be anti-racist and teach others how to be anti-racist. Anti-Racist Baby, which is written by Ibram X. Kendi and illustrated by Ashley Lukashevsky, will be read by actor and activist Kendrick Sampson.
What up, y'all? My name is Kendrick Sampson, and I'm gonna be reading Anti-Racist Baby. Anti-racist baby is bred, not born. Anti-racist baby is raised to make society transform. Babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There's no neutrality. Take these 9 steps to make equity a reality. Number 1, open your eyes to all skin colors. Anti-racist baby learns all the colors, not because race is true. If you claim to be colorblind, you deny what's right in front of you. Number 2, use your words to talk about race. No one will see racism if we only stay silent. If we don't name racism, it won't stop being so violent. Number 3, point at policies as the problem, not the people. Some people get more while others get less because policies don't always grant equal access. Number 4, shout. There's nothing wrong with the people, even though all races are not treated the same. We are all human, Anti-Racist Baby can proclaim. Number 5, celebrate all our differences. You gotta celebrate, do a little celebration. Anti-Racist Baby doesn't see certain groups as better or worse. Anti-Racist Baby loves a world that's truly diverse. Number 6, knock down the stack of cultural blocks. Better knock them down. Anti-Racist Baby appreciates how groups speak, dance, create as they choose. Anti-Racist Baby welcomes all groups, voicing their unique views. Number 7, confess when being racist. Nothing disrupts racism more than when we confess the racist ideas that we sometimes express. Number 8, grow to be an anti-racist. Anti-Racist Baby is always learning, changing, and growing. Anti-Racist Baby stays curious about people and isn't all-knowing. Number 9, believe we shall overcome racism. Anti-Racist Baby is filled with the power to transcend, my friend, and doesn't judge a book by its cover, but reads until the end. Now, what are some of the things you can do to be anti-racist? All right, y'all. Peace.
Born with it.
That was really, really amazing. Thank you for everyone who participated in choosing that. That was an amazing short video. Hello again, everybody, all who were present. Hello again for this morning and those who weren't. My name is Lorrell Killpatrickv. Thank you to the congregation for inviting me back to speak during this time of particular acknowledgement and value of the work and leadership of women in our societies during the last month of March. While we're in the habit of identifying the contributions of marginalized groups during particular times, of course we should, and many of us do, realize that the work done by these groups are continually and drastically needed. I think an example of that work is definitely this video. Anti-Racist Baby talked about the purposeful action that's needed to be taken to identify these things and to identify people that encourage the victimization of others, and also that encourage people to not recognize it and not move against it. And that's what we have to do. That's how we have to understand that we have to raise children into adults who see themselves as agents of action, personal action, systemic action that's necessary for us to do better, for us to learn more, and for us to achieve the type of society that we want to be in. Something that can move us past a great idea of how things could be and make us continue to form the type of society we want to be in. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and invite all of you to participate in the conversation that we'll have today in terms of what this action can mean, how this action can be formed, why this action should grow. And again, just like our conversation this morning, this definitely should be a conversation that's had by all of us, not just me speaking in one direction. We all have to learn from each other what is possible for us to do, what are the things that prevents us from trying to take a step, and how we can support each other in what we do. Throughout our lives, we continue to learn about social issues that require united action. And we're going to talk about what action means. A lot of times action starts with recognizing that something is needed, recognizing that knowledge is needed, recognizing that personal feelings are also needed, and that things need to be solved with what we can do. These issues include racism on an international scale, sexism in all of its numerous forms, an international system of capitalism, which is a little hard for people to talk about. I define that as the prioritization of profits of a small group of people with power over a majority class of people, of workers, who generate those profits but don't benefit from them. Also, something that we can define is classism, casteism, ableism, all of the isms, and the fact that all of these things need to be informed. The action against them needs to be continued, to fight back against them and in a united way, fight for our collective dignities and our goal towards freedom. That's so important to look at this fight that I think is very necessary to identify, not just as a physical issue, but of informing ourselves about things, but holding ourselves responsible for taking it further. This action can happen at every possible personal or societal level, whether we're talking about starting as an ideological realization of things over social media, which a lot of us have experience with, being the first step of learning things, and sometimes being the first step of speaking about things, and how that has to advance as in-person practices in many forms. The forms that I myself have participated in is social action, in terms of being with people, joining people, and valuing the leadership of people who are suffering the most, who are recognizing how they are affected. A lot of us don't recognize that. We're not taught that we too have a reason to join these actions that we see a lot about. Some examples in that include things like people fighting for insurance disability benefits, getting needed tuition reimbursement, demanding justice in a system that prioritizes money over the people, or for holding ourselves to the responsibility of being more than just those who have emotions about an issue and those who can push forward for action. It's very, very important. Being active because we understand how we're all affected in different ways, but in important ways. The goal isn't for all of us to say, how much we're affected in any one situation or the other. But we have to learn and have to understand that that effect does happen. It's not just that we feel bad for people, although that could be the start. After that feeling bad, what can we do? That was a part of the conversation we had earlier today about realizing that action can be taken in terms of this international scope of war that's happening right now. People identified that they did feel something about this. They felt bad about the suffering that they're hearing about now. And we talked about how this suffering didn't just start now. So we have to take our feelings that just happened now, and we have to sometimes look in the past to see how they've always transpired and what has kept us from knowing about this suffering as it was. What's the importance of knowing about these issues now? And how can we look at these issues that are happening so far away and tie them to actions that we can do locally? That's so very important. Everyone here is in a unique position to advance the positive action that happens in their communities and in their lives. And again, it starts off with that information that we have to grow. One way out of many is to find out more about people and groups around you and the actions they're committed to, and taking the leadership of people who are primarily affected in any one way or the other. In some of those ways, we are primarily affected, and we have to learn and be comfortable with giving a certain amount of leadership, which doesn't mean just being in charge and being the boss, of course. Giving a certain amount of leadership and getting people to join with us and finding the similarity of how different things affect us. In Northwest Indiana, we're all really, really close together, but we are all so very, very far apart in many instances. Learning that the things that affect us in one area, like a Chesterton or a Valparaiso, in terms of the poisoning effect of their water, has always affected people also in other areas like East Chicago and Hammond. And realizing that what is similar is who benefits from these effects and how we can find a point of unity in struggling against it, fighting against it, and finding some type of equity. And after finding that equity, building a relationship between these groups that seem so far away, but are experiencing very similar things. We talked a little bit about Gil Scott-Heron in the beginning, in our beginning conversation this morning. Gil Scott-Heron has a more popularized song called "The Revolution." The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. He said in a historically impactful way that when he put the emphasis on the action of revolution, not just the thought or ideas about it, this has to be done in a very thought-provoking way. It has to be done in a way that makes us responsible for realizing that the things that happen to us and the things that happen to other people have a point of unity. And that even takes a certain amount of action, pushing ourselves towards realizing these things. One of the groups I'm organized with is called Black Lives Matter, Northwest Indiana, Gary. We've taken the responsibility of joining several actions on issues like police violence in our communities, particularly effective in Gary, East Chicago, Hammond, and Munster. We take that responsibility for the for-profit systemic violence of continued imprisonment of various kinds. The public and private system that prioritizes money over people in terms of our education systems, primarily of Black, Latin, and a great number of working class white students in Northwest Indiana. There are a lot of action that we have access to, that we can get information about, and that we can join. Well, all at this point, I'd like to open up the conversation in terms of how people think about this action, how people can see themselves organized in spaces, religious spaces, social action spaces, spaces that have a connection with their employment, even to develop an understanding and move towards action that immediately affect local and systemic change, but are related to the things that we're seeing more news about, that are related to the things that we're hearing about a lot more during this very uneasy time. And thinking about things in terms of what could or what does block our action. What more can we do? What lessons can be learned? Who they can be learned from, how they can be engaged, and where to transform this concern into action. So at this point is when I like to pass it off to people listening and hear what you think about these issues that are happening and how you see yourselves affected, how you see yourselves possibly able to join or build some type of action and what that looks like, or the experiences that you've already had. What do you think? I believe we talked about people will have the opportunity to either just speak loudly or have a microphone passed around, whichever works best in the public space you're in. Don't be shy.
Permission to pass the microphone so that you can be heard. Anybody would like to comment, raise a question?
Well, I'll just comment that where I'm working in Philadelphia as a nurse in the Thomas Jefferson University system, they are very justice and equity oriented. We have a very strong social justice, social equity focus, and not a day goes by that somebody isn't calling somebody on the line about a comment that they made or a perception that somebody had, and almost to the point where it's okay to take 5 or 15 minutes and just say, that comment that you just made me uncomfortable, or advocate for somebody else to say, that comment you just made was very uncomfortable for me, for that person, and to kind of give an opportunity to discuss it. We don't have to go at length about it, but put it as a bookmark so that we can come back to it and talk about it.
Wow. Wow, that's an awesome workplace.
Being able to say that is action. Knowing that you have the power to talk about something that's affected you, that's an unbelievable amount of action. Our voices are usually the first things that we act with, and after that usually comes some type of physical expression about it. So that's amazing. That's amazing. When we talk about people being in the streets with protests, a lot of times we don't think about being in medical environments and what that looks like, the action that's involved in that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Someone else?
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
That's a loud talker over there.
Woo! Okay. All right, Lorrell. So for many years, I did not give much thought to the environmental struggles in our world. And when we moved back to Northwest Indiana in 2000, it all kind of started rushing at me. And I'm just going to take a minute here to, I'm almost going to drone, but I think it's instructive, I think it is anyway, the list of environmental tragedies and fights that have been occurring here in Northwest Indiana since we moved back here in 2000. I'm going to start in Whiting and move my way east. In Whiting, we have the Lake George swans and the poisoning of Lake George, where there's a group of people in Whiting called Swan that that are engaging in this fight. In Whiting at the BP refinery, activists, including our own parishioners, spent energy in fighting the continued poisoning of our region through the refinery and took arrests, including one of our own parishioners. In Hammond, we're fighting right now the dune, the destruction of the dune in Briar East Woods. I'll just keep going. In Gary, students from Steel City Academy fought against the placing of a recycling dump. And I'm going to forget things. In East Chicago, the CDF over by the high school where they are dredging the canal and putting poisonous toxins in a dump next to the high school. In East Chicago, West Calumet housing projects inundated with lead, poisoning the people in that community for years from the factories in that area. In Hobart, what's going on right now with the zoning. In Portage, the releasing of poison into Lake Michigan by the steel mills, poisoning Lake Michigan and putting all of us at risk. In Michigan City, the coal ash plants going on there. So I'll stop. But we as a people, from Whiting to Michigan City, are under attack constantly by companies and by their, to be blunt, henchmen that don't give two hoots about our lives. They're political henchmen who give them a slap on the wrist, like the U.S. Steel poisoning of Lake Michigan. And as far as U.S. Steel is concerned, it's the cost of doing business. And so we need to continue to not get discouraged, but to come together and take action.
Absolutely, absolutely. All of these things that you listed, to me, brought out a point of unity. I believe with that action, for it to have the most important effect, there has to be an acknowledgement of unity. Because sometimes what that can look like is people in communities continuing in the way, honestly, that we have been taught, which is that what happens in our area is specific to us, should only involve us, only has anything to do with us, which is how action can be halted immediately. I think in terms of East Chicago, my family is from a neighborhood called New Edition, which is pretty much right next to Whiting. And across the street from my family's home were these very large containers that I remember my grandmother and my aunts telling me they called them hot dog containers or hamburger containers or pancake containers, which contained the substances that poisoned them and continue to do so throughout their lives. And how this becomes very normalized, and how the effects of all of these factories, all of these profit-generated threats, absolutely went to West Calumet, absolutely went to Highland, absolutely went to Hammond, absolutely went as far out as Valparaiso. And we're all affected by it. So thank you so much for that, because I think we have to often understand that there is unity in what can be identified very negatively and maybe even depressingly as suffering. But what gets us beyond that is using that unity to fight back, which may seem like an aggressive, violent term. But to me, it's a term of unity and action, a unity that starts with organizing and learning the ways that we all are affected, that ends in us seeing ourselves as more similar than we've ever been different because of this process that we've engaged in together. So thank you very much for that. Others, and just to get back to the main thing, what can be done to block this forward movement? How do we identify these things? How do we identify the slowing down action? That is important because we have to know how to go beyond it. What more can we do after we've recognized the things that are happening? Where does the active part of action take place? And what lessons can be engaged from people in other areas, maybe, to the transition of their theory to action that causes actual change? What are some other thoughts?
Lorrell, this is Gail. I just wanted to point out that one of the things that I did when I was working, of course I haven't worked in a while, but I worked in restaurant business, and I've always known that the restaurant business really abused their employees. So this is a very small level of action, but any level of action we can do is good.
Yes.
So what would happen is I work with a lot of young people, really young people, 18, 20, 23. And when they have to take off work, or when something happens where it's an employee-employer struggle, they don't want to do this because of the employer, they don't want to do that because of the employer, they aren't aware of their rights. And having been a top supervisor, I am quick to tell them what their rights are. And they're like, really? I can do that? And I said, well, the law says you can do that. It is a right to work state, but be aware of your rights. You can do this, you can do that. And so I've really been able to educate a lot of young people around me about their rights so that they don't have to be treated like a commodity by their employer and just used and abused.
And with not knowing those rights comes, I think, a very large amount of fear. And I think fear is a concept that we all have talked about in the spaces where we are, whether it be activist spaces, employment spaces, religious spaces. There's a fear that we are taught by those who benefit from it, that we just shouldn't be involved in much to a certain extent, that it is that action that should be avoided. We should stay in the constant state of these feelings. And usually those feelings are negative ones that affect us in a whole lot of ways. But I think just what you said, Gail, in terms of letting people know that they have the option of action is huge. And you said it, in terms of seeing it as a small way in things that are done, but giving people that information is immense. It is immense. So again, we have blocking this forward movement, blocking this action that happens in so many ways. I believe, again, as I said, in Northwest Indiana, we're all very close to each other, but the way that we grow up can be very, very far away from each other. And so an idea about validating the actions that happen in areas we don't live in can prevent us from being active where we have the right to be in our own spaces, because we've been taught to not prioritize the actions of others, to see people who participate in action as being negative or being deserving of whatever negative thing is happening. So that makes us not participate in a whole lot of action. And that happens. That's very real. Other thoughts, other comments?
Lorrell, this is Maggie, and
Hi.
I know many people here know the action that the church took. We protested Chase Bank for their fossil fuel holdings, and then ultimately have transferred our church bank account over to a local bank that has a much cleaner portfolio, and it's a hassle, right? It's a hassle, change over all your banking for an organization, but we were determined to take that step, and we have, and so that was one small action that we were able to take as a community. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And no matter what that first action is, it can absolutely be related to other actions. That can absolutely happen. I've in different moments of these activist things that have happened in the area. You know, we've all seen each other. We've all had interactions with each other. There is a moment when the action that we learn about, the things that we learn about, puts us in a physical space of being involved in it. And that involvement is very important. What lessons do folks think can be engaged from seeing these other actions happening to push us in a place where we also act, where we can also do something? And as an example, I'll use a very talked about tragedy that happened in Munster at the community hospital, where a young man who was having a mental health crisis couldn't get into the facility that he was going to because of a COVID outbreak, was taken to community hospital. And unfortunately, the ending is that not only was he killed by security, but another security officer was killed as well. His grieving family decided to lead and participate in the action of letting people know that having a mental health crisis is not a reason that someone should die when they're seeking treatment. And we've seen a large amount of people who live in this community that have not been involved in any public action before, coming out and supporting this family, coming out and supporting these issues, and having the conversation about how that's not just them being nice, but that's them seeing themselves as potentially affected by something that they don't have control over, which is how other people see us. And it also has gotten not so positive reactions for people who have been taught to be negative when other people act. So I say that to throw the question out there of what is it that needs to be done, that people feel needs to be done to increase the chance of their own action, to push them forward from an ideological understanding of what's happening to the need for them to be physically active in something, regardless of if it's in their area or not.
I have a comment on that. So this is something I wasn't aware of for the longest time, but I decided one day, I was like making some kind of blanket and decided to watch a documentary about the ocean. And something that people are told is how much pollution is in the ocean, but what we don't realize is how much there is. And something I didn't know was the ocean actually absorbs about 93 to 97% of our, to make oxygen, like it collects all of the, I can't think of the word, carbon dioxide. And it's something that, I wasn't aware of until I watched that documentary, and how many companies in different countries have used the ocean to their advantage and have actually killed so many fish, and not even just fish, but the predators that kill the fish. So there's a lot of different things that play out that could affect the ocean in a worse way. So something that they suggested, which it's a personal choice, is to kind of boycott eating fish, which will affect those companies that are attacking the fish. They won't profit anything. So that's just something I thought about, but I think, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say one thing. My name is Bradley, by the way. One thing that I think is interesting about society in general is the kind of media that we consume as far as these topics go. We glamorize, like, earlier we were talking about, war and stuff. We glamorize movies that glamorize war. There's propaganda around them. Our heroes are strong people who fight for freedom, whatever. But I remember as a kid watching Erin Brockovich starring Julia Roberts and thinking, that's my hero. And I just think one really small thing that we can do is push more movies like that, push more media, more books that that glamorize people who actually fight for change that positively affects people versus these heroes that are, stereotypical and standard and kind of harmful in ways.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I think that brings us to a perfect place of a very soon, too soon closing for our conversation. I think what you said, looking towards the representation of action, is immensely important. And we can look towards things that have been put together in terms of film, in terms of series and things like that. But we can also look directly around us. We can look at things that are happening right next to us or right in front of us, things that we'll never see a movie about. We'll never see a movie about these pushbacks that folks had against the collection areas across from East Chicago Central High School in the middle school, where all of that contaminated chemicals were put in that continued to poison the community. We'll never see a movie about the residents of West Calumet generationally paid to not talk about how their family members were poisoned. We'll never see a documentary about how people in the East Chicago or the New Edition Whiting area continue to live with these pollutants literally in their front and backyard, and how one community will get a gorgeous looking park and another community will just get poisoned, as the community with the gorgeous park is poisoned too. But I guess it feels a little better with the park. I'm not sure. But we won't see films about these things. We won't see actors and actresses that we admire playing these characters. Sometimes we will, but we can also see people who work and who push forward and lead people to get involved right where we are. And that's the important part of action. It's usually happening very, very close to us. And all we need to do is recognize where it is and how we can get involved. And these conversations are the starting point in that. So thank you, everybody, for participating in it. Thank you for using your voices and for really thinking about these concepts as we've talked about them. And please feel free to get in contact with me about how to push forward our physical activity after we've gone from thinking about it, after we've gone from talking about it, to be involved physically in actions in our area. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
We give to remind ourselves how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and sacred space. We give with the faith that together we have enough. There is an online link on the screen for both one-time and regular donations. You can also contribute in person right now by putting paper money and loose change in these baskets and cups.
Just real quick, this is the last collection for this month, and since we just came back in person, this collection is for Razom for Ukraine. So Razom in the cups. Yes, I'm sorry. The loose change for social change in the cups is all going to Razom for Ukraine. They've raised so far $20 million. They've spent $8.5 million. They've distributed. They've been active since 2014 on the anti-corruption revolution. And we're joining with 60,000 other contributors in this effort. So since this is the last Sunday for this, please be generous in the loose change for social change cups. Thank you.
for your prayers, your presence, your service, and your gifts. We are truly grateful.
Please join me in singing hymn number 121. Rise as you are able, we'll build a land.
Where the oil of gladness dissolves all
Thank you, everyone. I think in closing, thinking back to the movie, or thinking back to the short movie that we watched, A Story for All Ages, the Anti-Racist Baby, I think there's a very important truth in being anti-something has to involve action. It has to involve participation. It has to involve the dedication to learning. It has to involve commitment, whether that be anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-oppression, whether that oppression is locally where we are or globally. Even being anti a global oppression has to be displayed with action where we are in various ways. And so I think that our conversations have drawn us to that. I think that the participation of this particular community in assisting what people are going through so far away from where we are joins into what I mean by that. I think the evidence of the work that a great many of us have done together proves that action, even though it starts as an internal process, has to become an external one. So thank you so much for bringing a lot of the things that we've talked about into reality in the ways that you're doing it. And contact other activist organizations that are around that share that belief, that share that goal, that share that commitment to action because of how important it is. Thank you, everyone.
Do you hear, oh my friend, in the place where you stand, through the sky, through the land? Do you hear, in the heights on the plain, in the vale on the main, in the sun, in the rain? Do you hear, From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs and all the prayers? They are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear, all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs and all the prayers? They are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear? Do you hear?
Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. The words are in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please join us in the parish hall for our social time.